Jane looked unremarkable. She was 40 years old, had medium-length brown hair, unpolished nails, and she wore the clothes that she bought at Plato's Closet. And every night after work, she went home to her husband and her 3 children. After 10 years of working for the company, they agreed to pay for her full tuition for her to go to school and get her accounting degree. And she finished the degree and she became the bookkeeper for their company, and they paid for her tuition. And during the recent tough economic times, the company took steps to keep itself financially afloat, which included reducing a lot of staff and staff hours and just kept a few remaining employees. Everyone had more they had to do. The owner of the company brought his wife on board to lead the administration portion with so many people having been laid off. And one of the first things his wife did when she got to the company is she went to Jane, their accountant, and asked for help in understanding the finances and the accounting system of the company. And Jane was absolutely no help to them at all. And that was the first red flag of what would turn out to be many. When the owner's wife comes on and asks the accountant to see the books, and the accountant is reluctant to show them how the accounting system works. It had been 6 years since the company had paid for her accounting degree, and the investigation discovered that during those 6 years, she used what she learned in her accounting degree, which they paid for, to embezzle $400,000 from the company that hired her, gave her a job, paid for her accounting education, and then she took that power and that freedom over their stuff and used it for her own benefit. God created each and every one of us with the capacity for 4 primary relationships: to God, to each other, to ourselves, and one that we don't often think about is God created us with the capacity to have a relationship with things. Created things by God, but also things that we create that don't necessarily have any intrinsic value. The scripture throughout teaches that we have a relationship with those things. And in the 8th commandment, we see a reflection. The 8th is a reflection of how Christians live, and it simply says, followers of Yahweh, do not steal. Followers of Yahweh, do not steal. The freedom and the power that we have being created in the image of God is not the freedom and the power to take what we want and take what doesn't belong to us. And Jane's education and accounting gave her power and freedom over the stuff of the family that owned the company. And she took that stuff that wasn't hers. She used that power and used that freedom to take what wasn't hers. In Exodus 22:16, this commandment includes kidnapping. So something that God created is not yours to take. In 22:1 and 12, it includes taking animals, which God created. But also in Exodus 22:7, it includes stuff. It includes stuff that has no intrinsic value that mankind creates and puts value on, and it does include money and goods and man-made stuff. So for us, it includes digital and intellectual property created by us, maybe not of any intrinsic value, but it falls in there into Exodus 22:7. And it's a very simple command with a profound meaning. When anyone is in the presence of a follower of Yahweh, trust in the relationship should be high, and anxiety about their things should be low. And Jane violated that. Jane violated community. The family who owned the company for which she worked was not as important to her as their stuff. It wasn't just opportunity, it's a decision that your stuff is more important to me than my relationship with you. So she reflected the opposite of the image of God. She was a taker and not a giver. And the community of God is meant to be a place where we're not anxious about whether others respect our things or not. We're meant to be a particular kind of neighbor, a neighbor where relational trust is high, and anxiety about our stuff is low. We're meant to be a particular kind of employee, meant to be a particular kind of citizen. Company gas for personal errands, billing for unnecessary services we perform, denting a car and not leaving a note. Anyone? I did that when I was 17. They didn't have video cameras in every parking lot at the time. I was happy about that. Withholding child support payment as an act of control. Not reporting all the income on line 7A of your 1040. Being 3 rabbit holes deep on Instagram while you're being paid by the hour. Stealing test answers with a glance. Rigging contract bids. Taking credit for someone else's hard work. Throughout my lifetime, I'm guilty of about 5 of the 7 of those, and I'm not going to tell you which. And I know as well as anyone that sneaky, rationalizing voice in our head sounds so convincing. The government will only waste my tax money. I'm going to keep this off line 7A. I'll keep it for myself, and I'll spend it on something better than they would. Or Jane, this company owes me. Or that guy's rich. He'll never miss this. He'll never even know it's gone. The one who steals violates all 4 of these relationships. The thief disrespects God by reflecting the opposite of his image. Again, God is a giver, not a taker. The thief breaks community with one's neighbor by creating distrust. The thief violates his or her own conscience by placing stuff above people. And the thief puts things at a priority in their heart that God never intended. The second that thing becomes a priority, that we're willing to break community by stealing it, transitions us to the thought that we are to be stewards of created things, not takers of created things. So we move over to the 10th reflection of how a Christian lives. The 10th moves us backwards from the act of actually stealing to the motive behind stealing. The 10th commandment moves us from the deed to the motive. It is possible to commit the sin of coveting without ever taking anything. There's an important point I want to make here about coveting, because we generally always use coveting in the context of sin. It does mean this intense desire. If you look at 1 Corinthians 12:3 in the King James Version, you'll see that it says, covet the best gifts, meaning have an intense desire for the best gifts of the Spirit. Covet them. So just having an intense desire for something is not bad, and that's why the 8th commandment can be so short: do not steal, do not violate any of these 4 commandments. But then when you look at the 10th reflection of how a Christian lives, there's some illustrations that are given along with it, because it's not just the intense desire that's a problem, it's the intense desire for something that doesn't belong to you, nor should it belong to you, and that's where the sin comes in. Coveting what is not yours makes it impossible to be a good neighbor. Even if you don't take that thing, the desire, the intense desire for what's not yours, the motive makes it impossible to be a good neighbor, because it objectifies the neighbor and prohibits us from being the loving neighbor who would treat them the way that we would want to be treated. If you want to, I'd like for you to text anybody in this room. You got anybody's cell phone number in this room? Get out your phone. You can text me if you have my contact. Get out your phone. I want you to text this, because this is how I remember stuff. I text it to myself. Or if I text it to you, then I have it in my text and I remember that. Because this reflection is important. Text this to somebody in this room. I'm going to lay my phone up here so I can see who texts me. Let's go ahead and open it up. I'll even turn on my ringer so you can hear him come in. This is what we're texting. 3 words. Coveting violates community. That's it. Coveting violates community. Thank you, Lizzie. Thank you, Amy Powell. Scott Lindsay up there running the live stream. Eric Prater. Thank you. Keep them coming in. Coveting violates community. Even if the act of something is never committed, even if the eighth reflection of how a Christian lives is not acted on, if the intense desire for something that's not yours is acted on, it is a problem and it breaks community. Someone asked, what's the difference in greed and envy and coveting? Asked me that when I was talking about the message, so I looked it up and I found this quote by Dan Boone. I'm going to go ahead and turn this off. You guys are out of control. Kayanne Andrews texts me from home. Coveting violates community. Hi, Kayanne. Glad to have you online this morning. Johnny, let's see if anyone, Frank Phillips, Jeff Lucas, Paulette Bricker, Kristen Porter, a number I don't have in my contacts. Whoever 740-313-3349 is, I don't have you in my contacts. I'm just kidding. I used the wrong area code, so you guys can't start texting them. I'm going to go ahead and turn that off for now. But here's what Dan Boone said about the difference in greed, envy, and coveting. Greed is the inability to say enough. It is the desire that lurks in the basement, always asking for more. It's an emptiness that seeks fulfillment through new acquisition. That's greed. Envy is the inability to enjoy life. So greed is never being able to say, I have enough. Envy is the inability to enjoy life because our eyes and thoughts are always on what another person has that robs us of our joy. That's envy. So here's coveting. Coveting weds the two of greed and envy by supplying a specific object to the envious greed, the neighbor's house, the neighbor's wife, the neighbor's servants, the neighbor's work animals. Coveting is worse than envy or greed in that it takes aim at both another person and that which belongs to the named person. That's coveting. Coveting in its motive plays into a lot of the other commandments. Coveting a neighbor's husband leads towards adultery. Coveting a neighbor's stuff leads towards stealing. Making objects, making things, objects. You know, that's you're coveting a thing that they have and you want it for yourself. It breaks community with that neighbor. It becomes the object of your desire, and that's idolatry. And coveting objects, the neighbor prohibits us from loving them as we would love ourselves. Coveting violates community. God has always been interested in neighbors. And as you know the stories and the parables and the actions of Jesus, he's always been interested in neighbors. If you follow the life of the people of Israel, he's always been interested in neighbors. And he teaches us through his own actions that he loves the stranger. He calls us to turn strangers into neighbors by doing good for them, providing hospitality for them, treating them justly, and welcoming them into community. And when people have to worry about their stuff, you can't do any of those things. You can't do any of those things. 99.9% of the time, we leave all the doors here unlocked except the outside doors. Because once you walk through these front doors, once you enter our homes for a Bible study, once you come over to our houses for dinner, you're a guest. You're invited into Christian community with us. And our relationship trust with you is high, and our concern about our stuff in the offices or the sound booth or in our kitchen or our living room or dining room when you're in our house for fellowship as a part of the church, our anxiety about those things is very low because we as followers of Christ start off with that relationship of trust with strangers so that we can have a total attitude of hospitality. And the second something turns up missing, then anxiety about stuff goes high and trust in the relationship goes low. Coveting is a violation of community. In a writing from 500 years ago, the Westminster Shorter Catechism gives us an Old English description of the 10th commandment that makes this teaching clear today. And I love, actually it's about, let me do the math real quick, 376 years old if I have it right. Someone can look that up, Westminster Shorter Catechism. I think it's about 376 years old. But look at these words on the screen if you guys would fire that for me. The 10th commandment requires such a full contentment with our own condition and such a charitable frame of spirit toward our neighbor, and all that is his, it forbids all discontent with our own estate. Let's break that down just for a moment. The 10th commandment, to not covet, requires that we have a full contentment with our own condition. Someone tell me what the Apostle Paul encouraged us to do about contentment. Anyone, just say it out loud. Huh? Be content? Yeah, in whatever situation you're in. Or am I remembering wrong? Was it Paul? Someone help me out. David, Joe, help me. Is it Paul? Okay, yeah. Yeah, be content in whatever situation you're in. Why would the Apostle Paul say that? It's because the second that you don't have contentment, whether you are living in a village in Nicaragua, sitting in a hut in Nicaragua, sitting in northern Guatemala wondering where you're going to get clean water or how much wood you're going to have to collect to boil water to get clean water, to be content in the situation that you're in your $73,000 a year job when you just would love to get that $102,000 a year job that's come opened up in the company that you're welcome to pursue, but be content in that situation that you're in, because if you don't choose, if you don't make a choice of contentment, then coveting is going to build up in your heart if you're not content with your own condition. And when it comes to the stranger or your neighbor, regardless of what they have, with a right and charitable frame of spirit towards our neighbor and all that belongs to our neighbor, so we're coming with contentment from our own hearts about our situation, and now we're approaching the stranger or our neighbor with a spirit of neighborliness and charitableness and hospitality. When to be able to do that, it forbids all discontent with our own estate. Coveting is a violation of community. Let me close this teaching with a very ugly example that I'm going to make up on the spot standing here right now. Okay, this is ugly. I've thought about it. I've thought about it a lot over the years, and how coveting can negatively impact people who come into the life of the church. This is ugly, but it's a potential reality. September 20th, you'll hear more about it. If I say anything wrong, they can correct it in writing. But September 20th, we're having a Sports Rec and Fitness Sunday, and we're having a volleyball tournament after church out here. So you're going to hear more about that. So let's imagine something happens that day. We all invite friends to come out and be a part of whatever type of cookout, COVID-safe volleyball tournament that we have. And you get a family in your neighborhood to come, and they come to the cookout because you've been visiting with them and you've been neighborly with them and hospitable with them as a stranger. They trust you with their stuff, and they come out to the Sports Rec and Fitness event. First interaction with New Start outside of your cul-de-sac or your apartment. And they're at this event, and the family has a good time, and the husband thinks, well, that's a good group of people, and goes home, never thinks about ever being a part of New Start again. And something in mom's heart starts tweaking. I want my kids to have some moral direction in their life. I want to engage them in children's ministry where 30% of you are going to be serving in the next 3 months. And I want to engage them in that. I want to engage my kids in a moral teaching, not understanding the Christian framework, not understanding the Bible, but the Holy Spirit and His prevenient grace is drawing them and saying, and they're going, I want my kids to understand this. So a couple weeks later, your neighbor says to you that came to the volleyball event, hey, I would love to come to New Start on a Sunday. And you're like, oh, okay. And I'm thinking, you hadn't already asked them? And so they come to New Start with you on a Sunday. Mom and the kids do. The kids absolutely love children's church because we had it on that particular Sunday in that particular service. That's a COVID joke. We're all working on it. The quicker you serve, the quicker we'll be having children's church all the time. And they come to church, and Mom sits here in the service, and Nate Porter speaks, and the Holy Spirit grips her heart, and she doesn't even know what it is or why. And she starts getting involved in the life of the church, and she hears us talk about the hospitality team, and she's got a gift of hospitality, and she joins the hospitality team to just greet people and make them feel welcome. She's not a follower of Jesus. She's in an entry-level ministry serving thing to say, hey, you don't have to be a follower of Jesus and stand and greet people and love on them and hold the door for them. And she becomes a part of that hospitality team, and she starts engaging with people on the hospitality team. And Tom, who does not exist, this is all hypothetical, is a part of that hospitality team. And Tom doesn't exist. And as she's a part of the hospitality team, she sees Tom interacting with his wife and kids. And he sure pays a lot more attention to his wife, speaks a lot more sweeter, down on his knees, looking his children in the eye when he's correcting them. And something happens in her heart where she goes, I want that for our household. I want my husband to respond to me the way that Tom responds to his spouse. I want my husband to respond to our children and talk to them in gentleness and respect and firmness the way that I see Tom talk to those children. And then she finds herself laying in bed at night thinking about how kind Tom is. And she's not pursuing an affair with Tom. That's not where this story's going because the kids were here. Otherwise, I'd take it that direction. But coveting starts building up in her heart, and you know what happens? The more real she sees Tom as a secure, manly follower of Jesus Christ, and coveting builds in her heart, the more dissatisfied she becomes with her husband who's not walking with Christ, treating her in mutual submission and raising those kids in the fear and admonition of the Lord. And coveting is destroying her heart. And we as a church have a chance to say, you want to see why the Ten Commandments are so beautiful?